Hey, hey, old timer. I said no onions. You got a hearing problem, or do you just not care? The voice cut across the serving line like a slap, loud, reflexive, the casual contempt of someone who had never once in his life considered that the person on the other side of a steam table might be worth a moment of basic consideration. It belonged to Petty Officer Second Class Marcus Drell, 24 years old, lean and angular, with the overconfident posture of a man 6 months into his first fleet assignment, who had decided that the rank sewn onto his collar was a license rather than a responsibility. He was holding his tray with both hands and staring at the man behind the grill with the expression of someone who had been gravely wronged. The man behind the grill was 80 years old. His name was Eugene Walter Cross, and he stood at the flat top in the Naval Station Norfolk Mess Hall with the easy, unhurried authority of a man who had stood in harder places than this and found them manageable. He wore the standard food service uniform, white coat, paper cap, non-slip shoes, and he wore it with no more self-consciousness than he would have worn anything else, which was none at all. He was not tall, and he was not imposing in any obvious way. He was simply present in the particular way that some men are present, completely, without remainder, as if he had decided at some point decades ago to be exactly where he was, and had never needed to revisit the decision. His hands moved with the efficient economy of long practice, spatula turning a burger, tongs shifting a sausage link, the flat top sizzling and spitting in the warm kitchen air. Those hands were thick at the knuckle, traced with old scars and the particular roughness of a life conducted primarily outdoors, and they were absolutely steady. When he finally raised his eyes to look at Drell, they were pale blue, the color of open water far from shore, and they held in them a depth that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with the specific weight of a man who had seen things that reorganized a person's sense of what was serious and what was not. He looked at Drell for one full second. Then he reached with the tongs, lifted the burger from the grill, placed it on the bun, and slid the plate onto the line in front of a fresh one he'd already been preparing. "Onions are on the side," he said. His voice was a low, even rasp, the kind of voice that has worn itself smooth over decades of saying necessary things without decoration. "Burger's the same." Drell stared at the plate. "That's not what I asked for. I asked for no onions on the burger, not onions on the side. Do you not understand basic English?" Eugene looked at him without expression. "They're on the side," he said again. "You can leave them there." It was 1100 hours on a Wednesday in February, and the Norfolk Naval Station main galley was running at mid-morning service tempo, a steady flow of sailors and officers moving through the line, trays collecting eggs and toast and the hot food the galley turned out in industrial quantities, the room filling and emptying in the efficient rhythm of a working naval installation. The galley smelled of industrial coffee and fry oil and the particular warmth of a space that feeds hundreds of people every morning and never entirely loses the smell of the previous day's doing it. The steam tables ran the length of the serving line, fogged glass above them, the hot food held at temperature in steel pans. Above the far windows, a February sky sat flat and gray over the piers, the masts of destroyers visible through the glass, the water of the Elizabeth River the color of old pewter. Drell had an audience. He was aware of it. The sailor behind him in line, a petty officer third who was watching with the careful neutrality of someone who wanted no part of the situation, and beyond him 3 more sailors who had slowed to observe. Drell's awareness of them was the thing that had converted a minor irritation into a performance. He had the particular sensitivity of a young man who needed the room to register him, and right now the room was registering, and so the moment had a life beyond its actual stakes. He looked at Eugene Cross the way a man looks at something he has categorized and found wanting. The white coat and the paper cap and the non-slip shoes and the flat-top grill and the steam table full of food that needed turning, all of it assembled into a picture that Drell read as irrelevance, as someone who had arrived at the end of their story, as background. It did not occur to him to read it any other way. That was his entire problem. And it was a problem he did not yet know he had. You know what your problem is? Drell set his tray down on the line with a clatter that was slightly too loud to be accidental. Your problem is, you've been standing behind this grill so long you forgot how to actually listen to a person. How long have you been doing this? 20 years? 30? He looked at Eugene's white coat with exaggerated examination, as if looking for a rank insignia that wasn't there. Retired, what? E3? E4? Couldn't make chief, so you came back to flip burgers for the guys who could? The sailor behind Drell looked at the ceiling. Eugene had not moved. He was watching Drell the way a man watches weather, not with alarm, not with indifference, but with the patient attention of someone who has learned that weather reveals itself completely if you give it enough time. You want the burger or not? He said. Drell leaned forward slightly, putting both hands on the edge of the serving line. What I want, he said, his voice dropping into the register of deliberate personal contempt, is for you to remake it. Without onions, he smiled. Not a warm smile. Think you can manage that, Pops? Eugene looked at him for a long moment. Then he reached over with the tongs, lifted the small cup of onions off Drell's plate, and set it on the back counter. He held Drell's gaze while he did it. There you go, he said. It was so unhurried, so entirely without submission or heat, that it landed in the space between them like something much heavier than the gesture itself. Drell's smile flickered. He picked up his tray and moved on, but the ease had gone out of his shoulders. At the end of the serving line, a culinary specialist second class named Petty Officer Yolanda Reyes had been watching the whole exchange from her station at the beverage counter. She was 27 years old and had been assigned to the galley for 14 months, and in that time she had come to know Eugene Cross the way you come to know anyone you work alongside every morning. Not their history, but their character, which is the more important knowledge. She knew he came in early and left late. She knew he never called in. She knew that the senior chief in charge of the galley, Senior Chief Ortega, treated Eugene with a deference that was unusual for a civilian food service contractor and had never been explained to Yolanda's satisfaction. She had once asked Ortega directly, "Who is he?" Ortega had looked at her for a moment and said, "Somebody you should be polite to," and left it there. Now Yolanda watched Drell move away down the line and watched Eugene turn back to the grill, and the thing she felt was the specific discomfort of a wrong that had no obvious remedy. Drell had been rude. Eugene had handled it with more dignity than Drell deserved, and that should have been the end of it. But it wasn't the end of it for Yolanda, because there was something about Eugene Cross, some quality in the stillness, in the depth behind those pale eyes, that had always made her feel that the full story was somewhere she hadn't been shown, and that the full story would change the arithmetic of moments like this one. She waited until Drell had moved to a table and the line had thinned. Then she walked to the back of the galley through the kitchen to Senior Chief Ortega's small office beside the dry storage. She knocked. "Come." She opened the door. Ortega was at his desk, requisition forms in front of him. Reading glasses she'd never seen him wear in the main galley perched on his nose. "Senior Chief," she said. Drell was giving Mr. Cross a hard time on the line, called him out in front of people, told him he couldn't make chief, that kind of thing. Ortega did not look up from the requisition form immediately. Then he took off his glasses. He set them on the desk very carefully. "Is Mr. Cross all right? He's fine. He handled it like he always does." "But," she stopped, not entirely sure what the but was. I wanted you to know. Ortega looked at her for a long moment. Then he did something she had not expected. He stood up. He picked up his cover from the hook beside the door. He said, "What table is Drell at?" "Senior Chief? What table?" "8, I think, by the windows." Ortega nodded. "Go back to your station." He paused in the doorway. "Actually, no, come with me." He did not go to table 8. He went to the phone on the galley wall at the end of the kitchen corridor, the internal line that connected to base administration. He dialed an extension from memory. It rang once. "Captain's office, Yeoman Stark. This is Senior Chief Ortega, main galley. I need the XO." A pause. "It's about Eugene Cross." The silence on the other end lasted 3 full seconds. When Yeoman Stark spoke again, her voice had changed in the specific way voices change when something reclassifies a call from routine to not. "Hold 1, Senior Chief." The hold lasted 45 seconds. "Then, Senior Chief, this is Commander Briggs. You said Eugene Cross." "Yes, ma'am." "What's the situation?" "A petty officer, 2nd class, in the galley gave him a public dressing down, ma'am. Line service interaction. Nothing physical. Mr. Cross is fine." A pause. I wanted command to be aware. The silence this time was different, not the silence of processing, but the silence of a decision already being made. "Which petty officer?" "Drell, Marcus, 2nd class. And Mr. Cross is currently on station?" "Yes, ma'am. On the grill." "Senior Chief, I'm going to make a call. You keep Mr. Cross there." Her voice had taken on the quality of someone moving while talking. "Don't let him leave for his break until I call you back." Yolanda, standing 6 feet away, watched Ortega hang up the phone. He turned to her. His expression was the careful neutral of a man who had decided to let events instruct rather than trying to instruct events. "Go back to your station," he said. "Senior Chief." "Who is he?" Ortega put his cover on. He adjusted it. He looked at her with the expression of a man about to say something he had been keeping to himself for a long time. "His name is Eugene Walter Cross. He was a naval aviator. He flew A-6 intruders off the Kitty Hawk and the Enterprise during Vietnam, and then he transitioned to the F-14 Tomcat when it came online and flew it for 15 years. A pause. "He has 6 confirmed aerial kills, Petty Officer Reyes." 6? That makes him the last living American ace? Do you know what an ace is?" 5 kills, she said. 5 kills. He has 6. Ortega's voice had gone flat and careful, the way people speak when the facts are doing enough work on their own. The men on his squadron had a name for him. They called him the Ferryman. You know why? He waited a beat. Because he was the one who flew into places where things went wrong and brought people back out. 3 combat search and rescue assists in addition to the confirmed kills. 3 times he went in when someone else was down and came out with them. One of those times he took a SAM hit on the egress and flew a damaged aircraft 300 miles to the boat and landed it. He paused. His call sign was Charon. Yolanda stared at him. As in the Ferryman of the Dead, Ortega said quietly. As in the man who crosses people from one side to the other. He turned and walked back toward the galley. Commander Angela Briggs, Executive Officer of Naval Station Norfolk, had gotten off the phone with Ortega and made exactly 1 call. She called Rear Admiral James Vickers, the installation commander, who was in a scheduling meeting with his staff, and who, when his aide leaned down and passed him the name written on a notepad, went so still that the meeting stopped entirely. He looked at the notepad. He looked at his aide. He said, "Get me a car." He stood up. He said to the room, "We'll continue this tomorrow." He was in his service dress blues and out the door in 4 minutes. He brought his aide. He brought his flag lieutenant. He called ahead to the galley. In the galley, Eugene Cross was still at the grill. He had moved from burgers to the lunch prep, slicing roast beef on the electric slicer, the machine running in its steady rhythm, the kitchen filling with the smell of cooked meat and the grease of a working line. He looked like what he was, an 80-year-old man doing a job with the quiet efficiency of someone who found work itself sufficient reason to be somewhere. 3 tables away, Marcus Drell was finishing his coffee, checking his phone, indifferent to the particular stillness that had settled over the galley senior staff since Ortega had come back from the phone. The galley's exterior door opened. Rear Admiral James Vickers came through it with his aide and his flag lieutenant, in full-service dress blues with the 2 stars of a rear admiral on his shoulder boards, and he moved through the kitchen without speaking to anyone except to ask Ortega, who had materialized at his side, "Where is he?" Ortega pointed. The admiral walked through the kitchen to the main serving line. He walked around the end of the serving counter and into the back of the line station where Eugene Cross was working the slicer. Eugene looked up. Something moved between them, a current of recognition, of history, of the specific grammar that exists between people who understand exactly what the other has done. The admiral's face, which had been controlled and purposeful, broke into something that was not quite a smile and not quite grief, and was entirely human. "Gene," he said. Eugene Cross turned off the slicer. He straightened up. He looked at the rear admiral standing in his kitchen with 2 stars on his shoulders and the calm of a man who had seen admirals before and found them, on the whole, manageable, "Jimmy," he said. The admiral's right hand came up. It was the sharpest salute that had happened in the Norfolk Naval Station galley in its entire operational history. Full and precise and held, directed at an 80-year-old man in a food service uniform and a paper cap. Ortega, standing at the kitchen door, came to attention. The aide and the flag lieutenant came to attention. In the serving line, 2 sailors who had been watching through the pass-through window came to attention without knowing they had decided to. Eugene Cross returned the salute. In the dining area, Marcus Drell had looked up from his phone. The admiral lowered his hand. He turned. He looked through the pass-through window at the dining area, at the sailors at their tables, at Drell at table 8, and his voice, when he spoke, was the voice of a man addressing a space, not just the people in it. "My name is Rear Admiral James Vickers, Installation Commander, Naval Station Norfolk. The man standing behind me is Eugene Walter Cross. He flew A-6 Intruders and F-14 Tomcats in combat service spanning Vietnam through the late 1980s. He has 6 confirmed aerial kills, which makes him the last living American ace. He flew 3 combat search and rescue assists, each in conditions that did not favor survival. He received the Silver Star, the Distinguished Flying Cross with 3 gold stars, and the Navy Cross, awarded for the 3rd SAR assist, in which he brought a downed aviator home in a damaged aircraft that his own crew chief told him should not have been flyable. He paused. The galley was so quiet the slicer's cooling fan was audible. His call sign was Charon. The ferryman. His squadron gave him that name because there was no one they trusted more to cross into the difficult place and come back out with what mattered. He turned and looked directly at where Drell sat frozen at table 8. This man served this Navy for 22 years. He comes back to this galley every morning at 05:30 because he says he likes to be useful. He does not advertise his record. He has never once asked for recognition. The Admiral's voice remained even. He deserves, at minimum, the basic courtesy that this institution extends to every human being who walks through its doors. He turned back to Eugene. "Gene," he said quietly, "I'm sorry it took us this long to say that out loud." Eugene Cross looked at him, those pale blue eyes, open water deep, entirely calm. "You didn't have to come down here for that, Jimmy." "Yes," the Admiral said. "I did. Drell was on his feet. He did not know when he had stood up. His tray was in front of him, and his coffee was untouched, and he was standing at table 8 in the Naval Station Norfolk galley, with the specific sensation of a man whose entire understanding of the last 20 minutes has been reconstructed around him while he was sitting still. Eugene Cross came out from behind the serving line. He moved without hurry past the admiral, past the aide and the flag lieutenant, through the dining room to table 8. He stopped beside Drell and placed one hand, steady, unhurried, entirely without anger, on the young man's shoulder. Drell looked up at him. "You've got a long career in front of you," Eugene said. His voice was the same low rasp it had been all morning, unhurried, unperformative, worn smooth. "Don't spend it looking through people. The ones who don't look like much are often carrying the most." He held Drell's gaze for a moment. "That's not a threat. That's just the truth. I'd have told you that this morning if you'd asked." He patted the shoulder once. He turned and walked back to the grill. He turned the slicer back on. He went back to work. It was 8 weeks later that Marcus Drell appeared in the galley at 0600, before the morning service rush, wearing civilian clothes on a day off. He stood at the end of the serving counter. Eugene Cross was at the grill, setting up for the morning, the flat top heating, the kitchen quiet at that hour, with just the two of them and the distant sound of the early crew somewhere in the back. Drell stood there for a moment. Then he said, "Mr. Cross." Eugene looked up. "I owe you an apology that I don't have the right words for." Drell's voice was stripped of all its former ease, the way a piece of wood is stripped when everything unnecessary has been taken off it. "I was rude, and I was wrong, and I didn't know who I was being rude to, which I understand is not an excuse." He stopped. "I've been thinking about what you said. About carrying things. I've been thinking about it since that day." Eugene looked at him for a long moment. Then he reached under the counter and came up with a second spatula, which he set on the edge of the grill. "You eat breakfast?" he said. Drell blinked. "Yes, sir. Then help me get this line ready and I'll cook you something." They worked in the quiet kitchen while the installation came awake around them, the smell of the grill heating up and coffee brewing, and the gray February light coming through the high windows and spreading across the tile floor in long strips. Eugene showed Drell the sequence of the prep without being asked to. Drell followed without being told twice. When the food was ready, Eugene slid a plate across the counter, and they ate on opposite sides of the pass-through window in a comfortable silence that asked nothing of either of them. Somewhere in this country, in galleys and hardware stores and park benches and quiet corners of ordinary places, there are men like Eugene Cross. Men who crossed into the hard place and came back, who gave 20 years and came back for more, who keep showing up without asking to be seen. They are the ones who have already paid for everything, and they keep paying anyway. Because that is the kind of man they are. They are the ferrymen. They walk among us, and we are better than we know. If you were moved by Eugene's story of quiet courage and timeless wisdom, hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to see it. And be sure to subscribe to Veterans Valor for more stories of America's unassuming heroes.